the sunset, bills on my mindset, I can't deny it. Getting higher than my income, income's breadcrumbs. I've been trying to survive. The glow that the sun gets right around sunset helps me realize that this is just a journey. Drop your worries, you are gonna turn out fine. Oh, you turn out fine. Fine, oh, you turn out fine. But you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. You gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. I know it's hard, to remember sometimes, but you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey, 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 hey. I got my hands in my pockets, kicking these rocks. It's kinda hard to watch this life go by. I'm buying into skeptics, skeptics mess with the confidence in my eyes. I'm seeing all the angles, thoughts get tangled. I start to compromise my life and my purpose. Is it all worth it? Am I gonna turn out fine? Oh, you turn out fine. Fine, oh, you turn out fine. But you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. You gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. I know it's hard, to remember sometimes, but you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey, hey, hey. Only rainbows after rain, the sun will always come again, and it's a circle, circling around again. It comes around again. I say only rainbows after rain, the sun will always come again, and it's a circle, circling around again. It comes around, but you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. You gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. I know it's hard, to remember sometimes, but you gotta keep your head up, oh, and you can let your head down, hey. And keep your head up, and you can let your head down, and keep your head up, and you can let your head down, and keep your head up, and you can let your head down. Listen,
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever in the world you are connecting from today. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Please let us know in the chat where you are connecting from today. So just add it in the chat. Let us know your city, your country, anything else that you want to share with the community. One of the most beautiful things of all these conversations is not just the content of what we are talking about, but the fact that after each of these conversations, people connect with each other. And that to me is part of the goal of doing this. It's connecting people, helping them network, talk to each other. And that is always very refreshing. And, I feel a little bit of a sense of accomplishment, to be honest, whenever all of you connected online here, get to connect with each other. So to connect with each other, a couple of things are useful in here. Number one, it is useful that you tell the audience where you're connecting from if you're connected live right now on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. And number two, it is also useful that you are inspired to be part of the conversation, not just a passive listener, doing something else and having this in the background. No, be here, be present. It's just half an hour that I'm asking from you, today to talk about empathy. And one of my most favorite topics, by the way, to talk about and discuss and share insights about on our Hacking HR LinkedIn page. So be active part of this conversation. I am hoping that you do that. We're going to be talking today about solving the empathy crisis. And I am super excited about this conversation. And without further ado, I want to invite my guest, Rob Volpe, to the online stage with me. Rob, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Enrique. It's so great to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm just looking in the chat on like from Berlin to Baltimore, Detroit, Iran, like wow, KSA, like amazing group of people here. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. It's always it's just incredible how technology can be a powerful force for good, right? And one of those, one of the goodness of technology is its ability to connect us,
Yeah.
from literally every space, every city, every place in the world. So that's beautiful to me.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. The things we've realized what technology can let us do through the pandemic. I think that's one of the gifts that we experienced starting 3 years ago, is just the fact that hey, we can actually connect, and it's and I think this group probably knows better than many how much it's changed the way we're working and where we're working and how, and it's been of great interest to me, just seeing how it's all playing out and running and evolving, and where's their resistance, and where people are embracing it.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. So Rob, let's begin here. For our audience, can you please share more about who you are, where you're connecting from, anything else that you want to share, and also why is it that you wrote a book about empathy?
Oh, absolutely. So, good morning, because I'm in San Francisco. It's actually a sunny day. We've had a series of big storms. The reservoirs are filling up. That's all really great stuff.
It's good.
But today is sunny. So yeah, I'm in San Francisco. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Ignite 360, and we're a research firm. We do insights, strategy, and training, helping people understand human behavior, and whether that's consumers, clients, employee groups, wide range. It's about deeply understanding what's motivating people, and then how our clients can actually impact and affect change. I am also an empathy activist, have been my entire life. Empathy is one of my superpowers. But about now 13 years ago or so, the magnitude of the empathy crisis that we've been facing in our society, and not just here in the US, but globally, really stood out to me. And because of the nature of the work that we do, because we're in the business of listening to other people, understanding where they're coming from, and then helping our clients make that same connection. Empathy is part and parcel. It's foundational, fundamental to the work that we do. And so I had this realization, like, wow, there's an empathy challenge out there. And then noticing our own clients weren't always making those connections. They weren't making the leap. Judgment was getting in their way. They weren't paying attention. And we thought, well, this is ridiculous. They're spending a lot of money on these projects. We need to do something to solve that. So we started exploring what was getting in their way. And that led to us looking at what was getting in our own way as we were going out and interviewing people and having conversations, and looked at the social sciences that were out there, talked to some psychologists, and developed out of that what we call the 5 steps to empathy, which is about what you need to do in the moment in order to be empathetic, and started coaching and training that, really well received from the clients. And that led me to write my book. I'll show you. Hey, yay. Tell me more about that. Solving the Empathy Crisis, one conversation at a time.
I had it in my desk. I don't know where it is now. I think I left it in my room. I'm not going to look for it now, but it's there.
Yeah. And I wanted to create a book that was engaging. I'm a storyteller. That's who I am. I observe human behavior, and I love to turn that into stories. And so rather than a didactic sort of book that says you must do this, you must do that, I share my own experiences, and honestly, a lot of times that I failed in having empathy in a situation, and then times that I've succeeded. And I use those stories to bring the 5 steps to empathy to life, so that people then, what happens is, through story, because that is how we learn, it sits in the back of people's heads, and then they're able to connect to it and draw on it later on. I've heard many people tell me, like, oh yeah, I was in this situation, and all of a sudden I remembered the story from the book, and so I learned from that and then handled something differently and got to a positive outcome. And that's just like, I absolutely, that's the most meaningful thing as an author, to hear that people have connected on that level, that it is helping them change their behavior and how they
Don't say the 5 steps yet, though. I mean, let's do it at the end. At the end, so that we keep people waiting for it, and I'm going to make sure that I reserve a space for that one question, Rob. But I want to ask you this: why are we on an empathy crisis, or in an empathy crisis right now? And was there ever a time when empathy was not a crisis?
You know, it's a great question. I think we could always, as human beings, be better at having empathy with each other, even in sort of the best of times.
Mm.
I think we've gone through a period, if you look back at the data that shows, here in the United States in particular, a decline in empathy skills amongst college students from 1979 to 2009, declined by 40%. And that was the thing that was just raising alarm bells for me. And we even find today that only right now it's just above a quarter of people say that they are unable to easily see the point of view of other people. So what that means is, as you go about your day, 1/4 of the people, 27% is the actual number, but 27% of the people that you run into today aren't able to easily see your point of view. And so as we started looking at, well, what were the societal factors? What was happening that was going on to that? There's so many different things. Globalization is actually one of them. The amazement of how many people, I mean, I see Nigeria, South Africa, Phoenix, Houston, is all the other countries and places I talked about earlier. We never would have bumped into each other like that before. And even on a more local level, the way people are, you're not just in your one little tiny community anymore. We bump into each other in a lot of different ways. And so I think that has made it more challenging for us, because we do have to work harder to understand the lived experiences of others and where people are coming from. So there's globalization, there's the way kids are being raised. There's a lot more programming of kids. I think back to when I was a child in the 70s and 80s. If I was bored, like, obviously there was no iPhone to put in my hands, but my parents would just say, well, go up to your room or go outside and play and come back by dark. And when kids are given that freedom and that space, they will often turn to imaginative and creative play.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I'm going to go role play. For me as a kid, it was Charlie's Angels and Wonder Woman in the backyard. And when you're doing things like that, and whether it's playing restaurant or doing a tea party or something, you're having to actually step into the shoes of the other characters that you're inhabiting. You're not looking at the world as though I am that person. You are actually being the other person. And that strengthens the empathy muscle. That helps you train. And so kids are not given as many opportunities to do that today. And that's been going on for a while. And then there's technology and screens and the relationship to the screens. The classic illustration that I give, two of them. One is, you're used to play video games on the sofa with a friend, and you'd both be staring at the screen. Now it's multiplayer, and you might be playing with somebody halfway around the world, but you're both engaging with the screen. You're not actually engaging with each other in a way that was going to foster empathy, where you understand where they're coming from. And then the other classic is you go out to a restaurant to eat, notice the table next to you, and it might even be your table, where everybody's down on their phone rather than engaging. So just the proliferation of screens. Social media is all about validation and self rather than about other people. So so many different things. Political polarization that's been happening for 20, 30 years. That's made it worse. Reality TV, it's this globally, it's a hyper competition. Winner takes all. Who's the survivor? That's not about empathy. That's not about supporting one another. And then you see shows that are actually rising to the surface, and they're getting a lot of attention, where I think about the Great British Bake Off, or I think about RuPaul's Drag Race and its incarnations around the world. And there's a lot more support among the competitors. And even though they are trying to win, there is this sort of empathetic, nurturing environment. And people are being drawn to that, partly because of the lack of empathy. Like, people see that there's a lack of empathy. In one other study, and then I'll let you ask me another question, but in one study that we did in September of this year, we put in front of people a list of 24 different societal and personal issues and asked them how worried they were about them. The top 3 things on their list were personal pocketbook issues, food prices, home energy prices, gas prices, or petrol. Those were the top 3 things. Number 4, 62% of respondents indicated they were worried about our inability to overcome differences of opinion.
Wow.
That's empathy. That's about our inability to have empathy and to overcome and to work together and to collaborate. And so many of the problems in society can be solved if we take an empathetic approach. And the same thing is true in the workplace.
Yeah.
Bring it back to kind of an HR sort of perspective.
Yeah.
Empathy is key.
Yeah. And I'm going to actually, my next question will be about work. Before getting there, I know it can be depressing perhaps to see the state of affairs, right? And especially because there are forces out there trying to divide us, and it's we're bombarded 24/7 with negative news and bad news about everything that is going on in the world. But one of the things that gives me hope is that I also see exactly what you're seeing, the rise of some communities trying to spread good news.
Yes.
And whether it is through reality shows or social media, or very famous people trying to share good news about things, awesome things that people are doing in the world, so that we don't fall into the despair of thinking everything is falling apart and it doesn't matter if I do anything differently because everything will fall apart either way, right? So that gives me hope. And communities like ours in Hacking HR, but I always tell people there are so many HR communities out there. Even if you don't want to be involved in Hacking HR, just be part of something that is trying to make change in the world. Get engaged, participate, be an active citizen, right? Because only then will we be able to kind of create the world we want, rather than it being created by those same forces that are trying to divide us. So, Rob, my next question to you is you said it kind of at the end of your previous comment, but if we had more empathy at work, what would change? What would be different? I want to sort of use your imagination and help others see the possibilities of what empathy can do at work. And I ask you this question especially because there are still people who think that empathy is a fluffy thing, that yes, you can be empathetic out there, but here you're supposed to be producing and delivering your your goals and whatnot. So I would love to use your imagination to think about what would change, what would be better in the workplace if we were more empathetic. I'm going to give you a second actually, because I want to ask the audience the same thing. Using your own imagination, for those of you who are connected live, and for those of you who are watching the replay later on, kind of like respond this question to yourself. But for those of you who are connected live right now, what would you want to see in the workplace if we were more empathetic towards each other? So please just say anything in the chat, a couple of lines, whatever you want to say. And also, if you haven't introduced yourselves, please do that in the chat as well. You see Rob is reading the chat, I'm reading the chat. So please post whatever you want in there. So Rob, back to you. What can we expect to be different at work if we were more empathetic?
Oh gosh, everything. It's kind of like, think of the problems that you have at work, and if you're an HR professional, with the team that you're managing as well as the organization. Empathy, one of my favorite slides in my empathy talks, the headline is "Empathy empowers the skills that we need to be the people that we are and hope to become." Mm-hmm. And there is so much misunderstanding about empathy. And the fact is, we are born with empathy. We are, there's different types of empathy. There's emotional empathy, and that's the one that people think like, oh, that's the squishy soft, and they're afraid of it. There's also cognitive empathy, and cognitive empathy is the perspective taking. And that's what we need to bring into the workplace, and what we use more often. It's about seeing the point of view of somebody else, and where is that going to come from? And often what happens, if you talk to people about being more empathetic, they're like, okay, I'm going to go get me some empathy. But then they don't understand what to do with it, because empathy isn't the end point. Empathy is this this ingredient. It empowers. It's the fuel that helps you be better at communication, at collaboration, at decision making and problem solving, at ideation, having forgiveness, building trust, persuading. What else? Compassion. It's so many different things that empathy fuels and enables. And then it's like, okay, you're going to be better at all of those things. And that actually then makes you a better, whether you're the CEO, the leader of the organization, a manager, a team member, an individual contributor. And then in your personal life, if you're a volunteer or a parent or a partner, a friend, you use empathy in all of those places, but you have to understand how to strengthen your empathy muscles so that you can be better at those skills, so that you can do better there. So when you think about like, okay, well, what is that actual change? When I'm giving presentations, I always send out an intake survey because I love to hear what organizations are facing, and I can guide content that way. One of the things that often comes up is there's this within organizations, and I'd love to hear from people in the chat as well if this resonates, but there's often recognition of empathy from a compassionate perspective. So I often hear about the way we handled the death of a colleague, or when somebody's going through a difficult time, or the way the company responded to COVID and gave us freedom and flexibility to work from home, or whatever the situation was. You get a lot of that. And then where things get challenged sometimes is how the organization and leadership is communicating. But often the other thing that comes up is it gets really busy and it's really stressed and pressure filled. And so we end up butting heads like this instead of pausing to actually work together. And that there's tension that's created where if you take a step back, take, as I call it, a curious breath, and then approach the conversation differently, you're going to find you're understanding where somebody else is coming from. And that does not mean you have to agree with them.
Yeah.
It just means I get where you're coming from, and now let me share where I'm coming from. It gives you that other data point that you can then use for your decision making.
Rob, let me ask you very quickly, based on what you just said, and please continue, but let me ask you this very quickly. When you are transitioning into that state of being empathetic, does that feel uncomfortable? Does that have to feel uncomfortable, as in I'm putting myself in a place of trying to understand other person's point of view, and I have to put myself in the place of telling them, I hear you and I don't agree with you, but I hear you.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It can feel uncomfortable. Like, it's like, and I hope most people can relate to this sort of analogy, but if you decide, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to get fit, and all of a sudden you overdo it and you do extra curls, or the weights are too heavy, and all of a sudden there's like this excruciating pain for days later. It's kind of like that, where it can feel very uncomfortable the first few times because you are building the muscle back up. It's atrophied or just never been developed. And it again, it's one more data point. It's like you've got the data point from the employee, where are they coming from? But you're also considering like, well, what's the need of the business, or the metrics, the financials, those things. Like you're pulling all of that together in order to inform how you move forward. But yes, it can feel uncomfortable for people. Empathy is an E word that people are afraid of, like emotion. But it's helping people understand this isn't purely emotion driven. This is about understanding. I can see that this is challenging for you. I can see that you're upset, or let me share where I'm coming from, asking for empathy from somebody else.
And I asked you this question, Rob, because I want people here to give themselves grace and permission to feel the whole range of emotions that they feel when they are transitioning into a state of being more empathetic, right? Because sometimes it can feel frustrating that you want to be empathetic, but you don't give yourself permission to disagree with others because you think that empathy doesn't allow you to do that. And that's not what it is.
It is absolutely not what it is. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions, and is actually part of step 4, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, empathy, having empathy does not mean you're giving up your own point of view. You really just have to kind of make room in your head that there's other ways of existing and moving through the world, and to be curious about that and try to understand and use that then in your conversation. One thing when I'm talking about empathy broadly, and what we need to do, there's the first thing is you've got to take a curious breath, but then you also have to just have self-awareness.
Yeah.
That metacognition, that mindfulness of like, where are my thoughts coming from? What's in fueling this? How am I thinking to respond? You've got to have the courage. Maya Angelou has a great quote where she says, I think we all have the ability to have empathy. We may not have the courage to display it. And it does take courage. And I'm not talking about the courage to like run into a burning building and save, lives.
Yeah.
It's these micro doses of courage that we need to like take that breath and go, okay, I'm going to try to engage differently.
Yeah.
It takes practice. It takes practice of the 5 steps. And then ultimately, as you were saying, it takes grace. You
Yeah.
have to understand that you are human. We are all human. We're not robots. And then hopefully no one is expecting perfection, but instead looking for progress.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
love that. And now I want to talk about these 5 steps to empathy. And before that, Rob, however, I want to sort of reemphasize something that you said before, which kind of like really resonated with me. You said empathy is not the end point, right? And I'm thinking a lot about this because I have seen organizations that include in their expected behaviors empathy as an end goal. And then they operate as, let's do training on empathy, let's do, bring speakers on empathy or do that on empathy. But when you look at the way they walk the talk, it's not empathy. So
right.
empathy has become a way to measure whether you have it or not and implement some strategies to have more of it, but it's not really lived in the day-to-day interactions among the people in that organization. So any insight about that?
I think that's absolutely true. I think one of the dangers, as there's been so much more awareness and talk about empathy, is, yeah, we're going to put that into our values statements, and okay, but to your point, to what end? How are you actually applying it? Because it's like, if you think about this journey, and if you've driven on a road with a roundabout where you've suddenly got to go around and you've got all these different branches, empathy is the roundabout, and it's like, okay, do I need to communicate? Do I need to collaborate? Do I need to persuade? I have to get to empathy before I can get to those other destinations. And if you've just gotten to the roundabout, all you're going to do is go around in circles.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, that is a fantastic analogy. Whoa. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, if it's just empathy for the sake of empathy, you're just driving around the freaking roundabout.
Exactly. Where do I go? What do I do? What am
Exactly.
So my challenge to organizations would be, how is empathy being used in service of the outcomes, the goals of the organization? So I think you can have something in your values statements around empathy and the way that we treat people. We strive to use empathy and be empathetic in our communication, in all of our work and how we show up. I think that's great, but really empathy should be infused in all the different behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rob, please share with the audience what we said that we were going to share with the audience half an hour ago, which is the 5 steps to empathy. So please, can you share them with the audience? I think everybody's like, please share the 5 steps to empathy.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to call out, Catherine made a comment in the chat. Empathy is a way to put the human back into human resources. Absolutely. There's a lot of great comments in the chat. I just want to acknowledge those.
Thank you.
So the 5 steps to empathy. So the very first one is dismantling judgment. And this is where that curious breath is so important, but it's really the thing that gets in more people's way, like almost twice as much as any of the other steps. Particularly, I find And there's some gender from the data that we've collected. There's some gender issues. Men are more judgmental than women, but everybody is having challenges being judgmental. And it's not about making a judgment. It's not about making a decision. It's about being judgmental, casting aspersion at somebody else. Those negative thoughts that are coming in, the things that are getting in your way, the stereotypes, the biases, the past experiences, all of that. So dismantle judgment is first and foremost. The second step is asking good questions. And that's about, not asking closed questions. It's about asking the broad, open, exploratory questions. Also not using why. I talk about that quite a lot and write about it in the book. Like, why is something, or whatever in a local language, what's the thing that when you got in trouble when you were a kid and your caregiver, parent, whomever asked you, like, why did you draw on the wall in crayon or marker? From that early time, we're put into a situation of knowing like, there's punishment involved depending on how I answer this question. And so you end up shifting the way that you answer because you need to come up with a rationalization and excuse to get out. If you've actually drawn on the wall in crayon or marker, you need to come up with a reason or an excuse to get out of trouble, because you're going to get in trouble. There's punishment involved. And that follows us through our childhood, into our school years, into the workplace. If you think about all the times you've asked, why were you late? Why is that report not done on time? Why? And it puts us on the defensive. So instead, you still need to understand why, but turn it around, use different words, use how, where, when, what, and who, or even just say, tell me more about what was going on when you decided to draw on the wall in marker. You're going to get a very different answer, and people aren't going to be coming at it from a defensive posture. So it's challenging to do that, but there's an exercise that I recommend where people take why out of their vocabulary for a day. And it's actually a great team exercise as well. And you'll be amazed at how often it's showing up in your vocabulary and what you're doing. So ask good questions. The third one is actively listen. Active listening, so critical, being present, paying attention, put the phone down, the laptop away. You got time for Facebook later. Really listen to what people are doing and read the nonverbal cues. And also the things that you might be sensing. So what else are you picking up? Are there things in the, if you're on a Zoom call with somebody, what are the things in the background that might give you more information about who that person is or their state of mind? Like, I don't know if you can hear, but there's a cat in my bathroom, which is one of my own cats, who's meowing because she wants out, and she's going to have to wait till this live is over. But I hear that and I'm like, just don't listen to the cat. It's like your child calling for help. And so you use those pieces of information to help understand where that person's coming from and what might be going on, which can inform then the next question that you're asking. Step 4 is integrate into understanding. So this gets back to what we were talking about earlier about making room in your head, that there are different points of view. There are different ways of viewing the world, and that's okay. We want to be curious about it. Have a great exercise involving ice cream around that one. And then step 5.
Wait a second. You talked about the ice cream and you're not going to say what the exercise is? You want to save it for the book? You want to save it for the book?
Well,
totally fine if you want to save it for the book.
Read the book, go to my website. I talk about it there. I do it live during trainings and workshops.
So everybody, if you like ice cream, that's another reason, not just empathy, but the ice cream is another reason to get the book.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
No, it's all good. And it can also be a good team building exercise for people as well. And then that 5th step is using solution imagination. So that's where everything turns around on itself. You're taking the things that you're hearing and you're using it to inform additional conversation and the next question that you're going to ask. So it's that point on the roundabout where you're about to start to go down the path, to use the skill or the tool. There are several. I mean, I love all the stories in the book. There's one in that section about we were doing a project in Canada with immigrants. And in Canada, the larger immigrant populations are from China and then South Asia. And there was one woman that I was interviewing. I was in her house, and she was from India. She was Hindi. And we were talking about what it was like to get a job and everything in Canada. She'd been a teacher back in India. Education credentials didn't apply. And she told me that she was able to get a job at Burger King, and she started working the grill line at the beginning. And I thought, wait a minute, you're Hindu is your religion. That cow is a sacred animal, and now you're putting that sacred symbol through the grill line at Burger King. Like, that must have felt really weird, and that's all going through my mind. I'm hearing, so I've heard what she said. I asked a good question, found out about that first job experience. I was listening. I was integrating that into my understanding. I was starting to realize, like, whoa, wait a minute, there's something happening here, and use solution imagination. I imagine what it might be like to be her with that belief system and being asked to do that. And so I asked her to talk about that, and she shared what that experience was like for her. And it was rather upsetting at the very least. And so that's just an example of some of the stories, but a way to use solution imagination. It's like, what are you hearing? And now you're using it to inform the next step in your conversation or your interaction.
Wow, that's fantastic. And everybody who's connected online, I hope you go and get Rob's books or book to discover more about these 5 steps, to discover, of course, all of the stories, which I'm sure will resonate with you, and lots of great work to do about empathy. But Rob, let me ask you this. You mentioned at the very beginning that in your work with about the many things that you work with companies, when you bring the element of empathy, you find some challenges, right? In the to just even bring that conversation to the table. And what are those challenges? And I ask you this because I think that if everybody, if an Martian was coming here and listening to what you're saying, they're like, oh, wow, that's awesome. I mean, why are you guys not doing that already? Right? And then we go to reality, and then we find, all right, well, because of all these reasons, there are challenges to empathy. What are those challenges, or some of those challenges?
Well, I think some of the things that we've been talking about, that misunderstanding of what empathy is getting in the way. And even though we recognize, we know that we need to be empathetic, it still can block us. And just one example, from Business Solver does a really great state of workplace empathy study every year, and all of us empathy activists are eager to see the results. But one of the things that really stood out for me, and this just shows that tension, they said that 69% of CEOs believe it's their job to build empathy in the workplace. So the leaders are recognizing it's their job. And yet 79% of CEOs say they struggle to be empathetic, and 77% of CEOs worry they're going to lose respect if they're too empathetic. So it's like, okay, they, know, 2/3 recognize it, but 3/4 are afraid of it, which is probably a lot of that 2/3 recognizing that they need to do that. And when I share that, I don't want people to go, well, yeah, of course, those are the CEOs and you know what they're like. Those CEOs were not born CEOs. They've worked their way up. They were managers at some point, directors, VPs. They were individual contributors early on. They've been taught that and they've learned that. So it's really important to recognize that fear that people have of it. How do you model that behavior? Recognizing the situational challenges that may be coming up, and coach people and help people.
Yeah, I love that. Rob, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you one last question. Actually, the title of your book is Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. And, we see it seems as if the world was falling apart around us, and, the magnitude of the bad things so much larger than the magnitude of the good things. So how do you keep yourself, and what do you recommend people to keep themselves grounded in reality, as in, if I make this one person become more empathetic, then I will have done a good job. I know I'm not changing the world, but I am changing that one person and the impact that person has in his or her own network. So how do you keep yourself grounded in that reality?
Yeah, that's a great question and a challenge. And it is about one conversation at a time. And that's what empathy is all about, is connecting individually, seeing other people's point of view. And yes, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty all over the world. But we need to focus on those individual conversations that we're having. And it might be literally one-on-one. It might be you and I talking, and through extension, all the wonderful people that are on this live and are watching it recorded. But it's how you connect with each individual person. Because if you can help one person be more empathetic, they're going to in turn impact. It's about how they show up and how they then interact with other people. So, it's throwing the pebble into the pond and that ripple effect. And that's how I think about it. It's like you're doing this information one step at a time.
Yeah. I have a friend, he always says, you're changing one life at a time. And, it's hard to think about it as, that the bad things happening are moving so fast and they are so large. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just talking to one person. I'm changing this or helping that one person change. It feels like so tiny in the context of the big things, but it matters.
It so matters. If we have the courage to connect with somebody on those deeper things and to really share how we're feeling, hear how they're feeling, offer them support, comfort, collaboration, connection, it can make those bigger things feel less overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do is have the courage to be vulnerable and to have empathy with each other.
Absolutely. Rob, thank you so much, everybody. Please connect with Rob, get his book. Tell me more about that, Solving the Empathy Crisis, One Conversation at a Time. Rob, thank you so much. This was a beautiful conversation, and I so appreciate the work that you're doing, and through one conversation at a time, making the world a better place for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Enrique. It's really been great. Great way to start the day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rob. Don't go away yet. Give me 1 second. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. I hope you join us next week in the next, we have a lot of events going on next week, including 4 incredible live chats that I am going to have as well. So the list is on the Hacking HR page, by the way. So I can't remember all the conversations, but all of them are incredible, about design, about inclusion, about anxiety. So lots of awesome stuff going on next week in Hacking HR. So everybody, thank you so much. Rob, thank you so much. And I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.